Wheelchair girl abandoned in the cold, but a dog appears and the ending will move you. In the small town of Silver Pines, where winter painted the streets in shades of gray and biting winds blue, lived Emma, a 16-year-old girl who faced the world on wheels. Her wheelchair, an inseparable companion, glided through the corridors of the modest home she shared with Mrs. Ellen, her grandmother, and only family. Mornings began with the gentle creak of floorboards beneath Emma's wheels as she prepared for another day. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee that Mrs. Ellen made filled every corner of the home, blending with words of encouragement and warm smiles that warmed more than any blanket. Emma watched the world through the frosted window, her brown eyes shining with dreams larger than her physical limitations. Her hands, calloused from the daily effort of moving around, told silent stories of perseverance. Within the walls of that simple home, grandmother and granddaughter wove a routine of love and overcoming, facing each obstacle with the strength of those who know that the greatest miracles are born in the most challenging moments. Emma nurtured a dream that burned in her chest like an unquenchable flame, to achieve the independence she so desired. Her mornings were filled with meticulous exercises, strengthening her arms while watching videos of Paralympic athletes on her worn-out phone. The sparkle in her eyes intensified each time she saw someone like her winning medals and receiving applause. In the solitude of her room, Emma rehearsed precise movements with her wheelchair, imagining herself participating in the regional adaptive basketball championship. Her fingers gently caressed a crumpled event flyer, kept as a treasure under her pillow. The registration deadline approached like a mist on the horizon, bringing with it a mix of anxiety and determination. Afternoons were dedicated to watching children play in the park across her house. Emma longed to be part of that world, to create genuine bonds that went beyond the pitying glances she so despised. Her drawings, scattered across her desk, depicted scenes of friendship and adventures she dreamed of experiencing. Between the, I'd say, pages of her secret diary, Emma wrote about her greatest wish: to be recognized for who she was, not for the wheelchair that carried her. She wanted to prove to everyone, and especially to herself, that her physical limitations did not define her horizons. Each word written was like a silent promise that one day her dreams would transcend the barriers imposed by fate. At night, before sleeping, Emma whispered her hopes to the stars, believing that the universe would conspire in her favor. Her spirit, much greater than any physical limitation, pulsed with the certainty that her dreams were just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Winter tightened its icy grip on Silver Pines when Mrs. Ellen's health began to show signs of fragility. Emma noticed the first subtle changes: her grandmother's more labored breathing while preparing breakfast, frequent pauses during household chores, and the weariness that settled on her face earlier each day. One particularly cold morning, Emma found her grandmother sitting in the living room armchair, hands trembling and face pale. The doctor's diagnosis was like thunder on a clear day: heart failure. The words echoed through the corridors of the house, turning the home's routine into a labyrinth of worries and responsibilities. Days, once filled with dreams of independence and championship training, were now split between caring for her grandmother and trying to keep the house in order. Emma learned to manage medications, prepare special meals, and handle health insurance paperwork, all without letting her own physical condition further limit her actions. Nights grew longer, with Emma frequently waking up to check if her grandmother was breathing well. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the ticking of the clock and Mrs. Ellen's occasional sighs. In her diary, the pages that were once full of hope began to accumulate stains of tears and words of concern. The basketball championship, flyer once cherished, now lay forgotten under a pile of medical prescriptions and bills. Emma felt the weight of responsibility grow on her shoulders, while her dreams seemed to fade like the morning mist that covered the house windows. Mrs. Ellen, even in her frailty, tried to maintain the cheerful spirit that had always characterized her. She told stories from the past between coughing fits, smiled even when pain consumed her, and insisted that Emma not abandon her goals. But Emma saw in her grandmother's tired eyes a silent plea for help that she couldn't ignore. Hospital visits became more frequent, and Emma found herself torn between the desire to care for her only family and the need to stay strong to face her own challenges. The creaking of her wheelchair wheels through Hospital corridors replaced the sounds of the training sessions she loved so much. In her moments of solitude, Emma watched the world continue its course through the window, while feeling her own life enter a state of waiting. Her dreams of independence and recognition now seemed as distant as the stars she used to gaze at, obscured by the fog of a reality that was becoming increasingly heavy on her young shoulders. The determination that once drove her to achieve her goals now transformed into a different kind of strength, the silent resilience of someone who learns to place love above their own desires. Emma discovered, through tears and weary smiles, that sometimes true heroism lies in knowing how to postpone your own dreams to take care of those you love. The cold night enveloped Silver Pines earlier than usual, with a chill that penetrated the bones and turned every corner of the small house into a hostile territory. Emma felt the silence differently that night, a void that seemed larger and denser than usual. Mrs. Ellen had been hurriedly taken to the hospital after a sudden worsening of her condition. The neighbors who transported her left Emma alone, promising to return soon to check on her. However, hours passed, and no one showed up. The phone remained silent, as if solidarity had drained away with the last ray of sunshine. Emma looked out the window, watching snowflakes begin to dance in the air, creating a white blanket that slowly covered the deserted street. Her wheelchair seemed quieter that night, as if it too felt the weight of abandonment. Emma tried to stay calm, but her heart raced, mixing fear with a loneliness that went beyond the physical absence of people. Thoughts raced through her mind. How would she care for her grandmother? How would she maintain her dreams of participating in the basketball championship? The responsibility felt greater than her own strength, creating a whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overflow at any moment. The phone finally rang, breaking the oppressive silence. Emma moved quickly, hoping for comforting news. But on the other end, only a distant voice informed her that the return would take a few hours. The temperature plummeted, and Emma realized she would need to find inner resources to survive that night. Her muscles tensed, preparing for another challenge in her journey of overcoming. It was then that a different sound caught her attention. A discreet bark, almost a whimper, echoed from outside. Amid the snow and darkness, something seemed to await her attention. Something that would completely change the course of that cold night. The cold penetrated every corner of the small room, making Emma shiver involuntarily. The silence was so thick that her own heartbeat echoed like drums in her ears. Suddenly, a subtly different sound caught her attention, something between a whimper and a scratching near the window. Initially hesitant, Emma approached cautiously in her wheelchair. The sound seemed to carry an almost palpable urgency, a silent plea for help that resonated beyond the walls of the solitary house. Her eyes, accustomed to interpreting nuances, detailed the snow-covered external landscape. A dark figure moved weakly against the relentless white. The movements were slow, almost imperceptible, of something living struggling against the biting cold. Emma felt something awaken inside her, a mix of compassion and curiosity that propelled her to open the window. There stood a dog, not an imposing or healthy animal, but a frail creature convulsing with shivers, covered in snow, and apparently abandoned. Its eyes, large and wet, conveyed a vulnerability that spoke louder than any words. Something inexplicable happened at that moment. Emma, who knew so much about loneliness and abandonment, recognized in the animal a mirror of her own fragilities. Without thinking twice, she moved her wheelchair toward the door, determined to help the creature that seemed as lost as she was. The dog, sensing the movement, made a hesitant step back but was too weak to flee. Emma watched with a tenderness she didn't even know she possessed. Her hands, used to defying physical limitations, reached out in a delicate gesture of welcome. In that precise instant, something more than solidarity was born. It was as if the universe had orchestrated an unlikely meeting between two beings marked by adversity. A subtle yet profoundly transformative turning point manifested there in the midst of the snow, between a young wheelchair-bound girl and an abandoned dog. The freezing night seemed to retreat in the face of that moment, as if respecting the beginning of a connection that promised to rewrite destinies. Emma decided to care for Max as if he were a fragile treasure newly discovered. The first days together were marked by a delicate dance of adaptation and mutual care. The dog, initially scared and trembling, gradually found his place in the small home. First mission was to take him to the veterinarian, a task that would require all her creativity and determination. With precise movements, Emma prepared her wheelchair, organizing a small bag with improvised blankets to accommodate Max. Every movement was calculated, each transfer a challenge that tested her physical and emotional limits. At the veterinary clinic, curious glances turned toward the unusual pair, a young wheelchair-bound girl and a scruffy dog. The receptionist, initially skeptical, was won over by Emma's determination and Max's fragility. Examinations revealed that the animal was malnourished, with some minor injuries but nothing that proper care couldn't resolve. The bureaucracy to register Max as a found animal proved to be a complex maze. Emma had to visit different public offices, facing looks that were sometimes compassionate, sometimes indifferent. Each stamped paper, each obtained signature was a small victory that went beyond the simple documentation of a dog. During the treatment, Max showed an almost human-like gratitude. His eyes, once dull and scared, gained brightness each day. At night, he lay next to Emma's wheelchair, like a silent guardian. In the hardest moments, when Mrs. Ellen's absence weighed more heavily, it was the dog's warmth that brought unexpected comfort. The household routine transformed. Emma learned to balance caring for her grandmother in the hospital and attending to Max's needs. She prepared special meals, administered medications, changed bandages. Every gesture was a lesson in responsibility and love that transcended physical limitations. The neighbors, once distant, began to observe that transformation with curiosity. Some brought treats for Max, others offered small helps. The presence of the dog seemed to soften the isolation boundaries Emma felt in her community. During training sessions for the basketball championship, Max became her most dedicated companion. Sitting discreetly in a corner, he watched Emma exercise, as if each of her movements were a sacred choreography. His occasional barks seemed like shouts of encouragement, breaking the oppressive silence that sometimes surrounded her. Max's recovery journey intertwined with Emma's own journey. Both were learning about resilience, about finding strength in unexpected places. Each day represented a new possibility, a new chance to overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable. Winter outside continued to be harsh, but inside that small house, a different warmth had been born. A warmth that didn't come only from blankets or the heater, but from the deep connection between a young wheelchair-bound girl and a dog who had found much more than shelter. He had found a home. Max's arrival instantly transformed the social dynamics around Emma. In the small village of Silver Pines, comments about the young wheelchair-bound girl and her new canine companion spread like wildfire, provoking diverse reactions among the residents. Mrs. Linda, the local bakery's gossip, didn't hold back words. When describing the unusual scene of Emma caring for the dog, her comments oscillated between false concern and a slightly demeaning tone, insinuating that a girl in a wheelchair would be incapable of properly caring for an animal. In contrast, Mr. James, the grocery store owner, openly admired Emma's determination. He frequently offered treats for Max and praised the young girl's courage in taking in an abandoned animal. His words carried genuine respect that transcended mere compassion. The neighborhood teenagers, initially indifferent, began to look at Emma with newfound interest. Max's presence humanized her image, breaking down social invisibility barriers that once surrounded her. Some approached to pet the dog, creating opportunities for interaction that previously seemed impossible. The local school was not immune to that transformation. Teachers and students discreetly commented on Emma's courage, her ability to care for Max despite her physical limitations. Stories of overcoming began to circulate, inspiring a collective reflection on inclusion and empathy. Not all looks were positive, however. A group of more conservative residents viewed the new dynamic with suspicion. Subtle comments about unnecessary expenses on a stray dog circulated in more closed conversation circles, revealing veiled prejudices. The ladies of the sewing club became particularly interested in the story. During their weekly meetings, they wove narratives about Emma and Max, mixing genuine compassion with the typical dramatization of small communities. The local veterinarian, initially skeptical, came to admire Emma's dedication. His technical reports on Max's treatment took on an almost poetic tone when describing the partnership between the girl and the dog. turning a simple appointment into a narrative of overcoming. Max's presence not only changed perceptions of Emma, but also provoked deeper reflections on difference, acceptance, and capability. Each interaction, each glance, each comment woven into the community represented a microcosm of silent social transformations. The dog, once invisible and abandoned, was now the catalyst for subtle but significant changes. Through his unexpected arrival, Emma was carving out a social space that had previously been denied to her, proving that true inclusion arises from simple and genuine gestures of love and care. Emma faced an internal whirlwind that surpassed her physical limitations. The challenges with her grandmother's health had placed her dreams in a state of existential suspension, where every movement seemed to require an intimate negotiation with her own expectations and fears. Max's presence brought an almost mystical dimension to her journey. The dog was not just a pet, but a silent messenger inviting her to rethink her internal conflicts. His deep eyes seemed to pierce through the layers of insecurity that Emma had built over the years, revealing a strength she herself was unaware of. In quiet hours, when the weight of responsibility threatened to consume her, Emma realized that her insecurities did not reside in the wheelchair, but in the fear of not being enough. Max watched her in those moments with an almost human intensity, as if he could understand every nuance of her inner struggle. The neighbors, once distant, began to see Emma not as a young girl with limitations, but as a figure of resilience. Her comings and goings with Max, her persistent training for the basketball championship, became a narrative of overcoming that echoed beyond the walls of her home. Winter nights, once so empty, took on new meaning. Max's warmth beside her represented more than physical comfort. It was a metaphorical embrace that comforted her in her journey of self-discovery. Every pet, every knowing glance defied the social narratives that tried to define her limits. Emma progressively understood that true acceptance would not come from external applause, but from an intimate dialogue with her own potentials. Max functioned as a living mirror, reflecting her courage and her capacity for transformation. Challenges: with her grandmother in the hospital, interrupted training sessions, postponed expectations, all melded into a complex tapestry of emotions. At the center of this weave, Emma and Max crafted a story of connection that transcended words, a partnership built in the silence of small gestures and knowing glances. Her struggle was not only against physical limitations, but against internalized paradigms of incapacity. Every movement, every decision represented an act of rebellion against a destiny that once seemed predetermined. The universe seemed to subtly conspire in her favor, using Max as an instrument of transformation that went far beyond the physical, reaching the depths of her identity and potential. A journey of redefinition that found strength in the most unexpected places. The tension in Emma's story reached its peak when the costs of Max's treatment began to accumulate. Every penny saved by the young girl seemed to slip quickly through, her hands turning into veterinary consultations, medications, and special care for the dog. Financial challenges overlapped with emotional ones. Emma watched her savings dwindle, feeling the weight of each expense as a silent murmur of her limitations. Max's now recovered and bright eyes seemed to apologize for the burden, which only intensified her sense of responsibility. Nights became a mix of worry and strategy. Between caring for her hospitalized grandmother and attending to Max's needs, Emma developed an almost mathematical survival plan. Her daily life turned into a complex dance of budgeting and hope, where every resource was calculated with surgical precision. The small sewing job she did in her spare moments was not enough. Her wheelchair, once just a means of mobility, now also represented her tool of resistance. Emma decided she would not allow circumstances to define her destiny. She began to take on small online gigs, developing digital design skills she could execute from home. Her hands, once limited by physical space, now navigated infinite virtual possibilities. Each completed project was a victory against the accumulating adversities. The neighbors, noticing her determination, began to refer small jobs. An elderly lady needed help organizing photo albums. Another required assistance creating digital invitations. Emma embraced each opportunity as a gift, turning limitations into possibilities. Max's treatment represented more than veterinary care. It was a symbol of her own ability to overcome obstacles. Every injection administered, Every medication given carried an energy of renewal and hope. Financial pressure created an environment of constant tension. Emma felt the weight of challenges like a low temperature that penetrated her bones. But her determination was warmer than any adversity. Her eyes, once full of uncertainties, now shone with an unwavering flame of resilience. Moments of rest were rare. Between tasks, Emma took a deep breath, watching Max sleep peacefully. That dog had become more than a pet. It was a journey companion, a living symbol that hope can arise in the most unexpected moments. Each day, Emma rewrote her own story, not as a victim of limiting circumstances, but as a heroine who turned challenges into stepping stones for her achievements. Max, in his canine simplicity, became a silent witness to this extraordinary transformation. On the brink between hope and despair, Emma discovered a secret that would completely transform her journey. It was a gray afternoon when she received the news that made her heart race. Max, her involuntary companion, actually belonged to a family who had lost him during a tragic accident. The revelation hit her like a bucket of cold water, emptying all the feelings of connection and belonging she had built with the dog in the past weeks. Every shared moment, the veterinary care, cozy nights, silent training sessions, now seemed to dissolve like morning fog. Emma's eyes, once bright with determination, became tunnels of deep reflection. How could she let go of the only creature that had offered her genuine comfort recently? How to return Max, knowing that her own loneliness might consume her once again? Max's family consisted of farmer parents, John and Mary, who had lost him during a violent storm months ago. Their stories intertwined layers of loss and unexpected encounters. Mary had lost a child years before and saw Max as an extension of her interrupted maternal love. When John and Mary came to retrieve Max, Emma felt the weight of a decision that transcended her own needs. Her fingers, calloused from maneuvering the wheelchair, trembled slightly as she held the dog's leash. Every movement was a silent dialogue between letting go and truly loving. At the moment of delivery, something extraordinary happened. Mary, with tears in her eyes, held Emma's hands. They were not tears of sadness, but of deep recognition. She saw beyond the wheelchair, beyond the rescued animal. She saw a resilient soul who had cared for her beloved Max with an almost maternal love. John, initially reserved, was touched by Emma's courage. His gaze, once stern, softened as he understood the emotional sacrifice the young girl was making. He no longer saw a wheelchair-bound girl, but a silent heroine who chose love over attachment. The scene seemed suspended in time. Emma, Max, John, and Mary formed a living tableau of human connections that transcended physical and circumstantial limitations. The icy wind of Silver Pines seemed to respect that moment, becoming just a whisper around them. Upon returning Max, Emma did not feel defeat, but an inner renewal. Every second spent beside the dog had been a school of overcoming, a lesson that true strength does not reside in possession, but in the ability to love and let go. Mary, before leaving, made an unexpected gesture. She handed Emma an old family photograph as a token of hope. On that aged paper was the promise that true connections are never lost, only transformed. Max looked one last time at Emma, a gaze that condensed gratitude, love, and a farewell that was not definitive but a "see you soon" in life. His canine eyes seemed to say, "Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for teaching me that home is not a place, but a feeling." At that very moment, Emma understood that her journey was just beginning. Returning Max was not an end but a new beginning, a living metaphor that true independence arises when we learn to let go, to trust, and to believe that love always finds its way. Emma found herself facing one of the most challenging moments of her life. The decision about Max hovered on her horizon like a cloud laden with contradictory emotions. Her thoughts danced between the love she had developed for the dog and the understanding that perhaps he belonged to another family. The young wheelchair-bound girl stared intently at Max, feeling each beat of her heart resonate with a mix of anguish and hope. The dog's eyes, so expressive, seemed to silently communicate with her soul, as if they understood the complexity of that moment. Her mind revisited every shared instant, the cold nights where Max kept her warm, training moments, where he watched her with dedication, the mutual care that had built an almost inexplicable connection. How could she simply let him go? Moral responsibility clashed with newfound love. Emma knew that Max might have a family waiting for him, people who were likely suffering from his absence. Her upbringing and values made her understand that the right thing would be to return him, even if it meant breaking her own heart. Discreet tears rolled down her face, silent witnesses to an internal battle. Every movement of her wheelchair seemed heavier, as if carrying not only her body but the emotional weight of that impossible decision. Emma's determination, so characteristic of her personality, struggled against the vulnerability of the moment. She needed to be strong, to understand that her love for Max also meant knowing when to let him go if necessary. Her thoughts wandered between the possibility of keeping Max and the ethical certainty of returning him. The young girl knew that her physical condition could not be a barrier to making the right choice. Every passing second drew her closer to a decision that would completely change her journey. The silence of the environment seemed to amplify her internal reflections. Max, attentive, stayed close, as if he could perceive the emotional storm unfolding. His gaze was one of loyalty that transcended words, a pure and unconditional love. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of maturity descend on her young shoulders. Her decision would be an act of true love, regardless of the outcome. Whether returning Max or keeping him, she was preparing her heart for a profound transformation. The choice was about to be made, and with it, the next chapters of her story would be written. A moment that promised to be not just a decision, but a true test of her character and her capacity to love beyond circumstances. The decisive moment arrived like a whisper laden with intense emotions. Emma felt each heartbeat resonate in her wheelchair, her muscles tense, anticipating the transformation that was about to occur. Max, her improvised companion, remained by her side with a gaze that transcended human understanding. It was a mix of gratitude, loyalty, and pure love that required no words. The revelation that the dog belonged to another family had triggered a whirlwind of emotions in Emma. Every shared memory, the moments of care, the cozy nights, the silent training sessions, danced in her mind like fragments of a dream about to dissolve. Her eyes, once bright with determination, now navigated a sea of deep reflections. Deciding to return Max would not be just a mechanical act, but a supreme proof of love, a love that went beyond possession, understanding the true essence of care. When John and Mary arrived, the environment seemed to freeze for a moment. It was not just a meeting of people, but an intertwining of stories of loss and hope. Mary, with maternal eyes that had lost a child, recognized in Emma not a young wheelchair-bound girl, but an extraordinary soul capable of unconditional love. The moment of handover was almost a sacred ritual. Emma held Max's collar with trembling fingers, each movement laden with meaning. It was not a farewell, but a celebration of connections that transcend physical and emotional limits. John watched the scene with silent respect. His gaze, once stern, now overflowed with understanding. He saw beyond the young girl in the wheelchair. He saw a heroine who chose true love over selfish attachment. When Max was finally returned, something extraordinary happened. A sudden cold wind from Silver Pines seemed to respect that moment, becoming just a gentle whisper. The dog's eyes met Emma's, a final dialogue that dispensed with words, a silent thank you for everything they had shared. Mary, in a gesture that would transcend time, handed Emma an old family photograph, a token of hope, a symbol that true connections are never lost, only transformed. At that very moment, Emma understood that her journey was only beginning. Returning Max did not signify an end, but a rebirth. She had discovered that true strength does not lie in holding on, but in having the courage to let go. Discreet tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from a profound understanding of love, overcoming, and life's unpredictable paths. Emma had become much more than she had imagined. Not just a young girl in a wheelchair, but a soul capable of transforming pain into hope, abandonment into love. Reactions to Emma and Max's story quickly spread through Silver Pines like wildfire. The small community, once distant and indifferent, began to look at the young wheelchair-bound girl with new eyes, recognizing her strength and compassion. Neighbors who once passed by Emma without even greeting her now approached her on the streets, sharing words of admiration. Her gesture of returning Max to his original family, giving up her own emotional comfort, deeply touched the hearts of the community. John and Mary, Max's original owners, became her primary advocates. They began speaking about Emma everywhere, recounting how the young girl with physical limitations had cared for their dog with a love that transcended any barrier. Their words created waves of respect and recognition. At the local bakery, the grocery store, and in corner conversations, Emma was no longer seen just as the girl in the wheelchair, but as a symbol of courage and generosity. Older women praised her, men greeted her with respect, and children watched her with admiration. Local business owners, moved by her story, began offering small support. The owner of an adapted gym offered to train Emma for free, recognizing her potential for Paralympic sports. A sporting goods store donated a special wheelchair for training. The school community was also impacted. Teachers began using Emma's story as an example of overcoming adversity in lectures on inclusion. Young students, once indifferent, started to understand that disability does not mean incapacity. Public events gained a new dynamic. Emma was invited to share her experience in talks, inspiring other young people with disabilities to pursue their dreams. Her narrative of hope and resilience echoed beyond the geographical limits of Silver Pines. Local institutions, touched by the transformation, created support programs for young people with disabilities. Vocational courses, sports training opportunities, and social inclusion initiatives began to emerge, with Emma as the initial inspiration. Emma herself, surprised by the reaction, found herself facing a unique opportunity for transformation. Her story of caring for Max had sparked a true revolution of awareness in her small town. Her dream of participating in the basketball championship, once distant, now seemed closer. The support she received, the doors that opened, all indicated that her journey was about to gain new and surprising chapters. The Silver Pines community had learned that true strength does not lie in physical perfection, but in the ability to love to overcome and to turn challenges into opportunities for collective growth. Emma's epilogue became a movement of renewal for Silver Pines. Her journey of overcoming, initiated with rescuing and subsequently returning Max, triggered a wave of consciousness about inclusion that transcended the small town's limits. Emma not only embraced her role as a transformative agent, but did so with determination. Using her own experience as a wheelchair user, she began organizing events that promoted the integration of young people with disabilities. Talks, workshops, and sports training became her new mission, inspiring hundreds to see beyond physical limitations. The local gym, moved by her story, adapted its spaces to accommodate athletes with different needs. Specialized equipment was acquired, and instructors were trained to understand each body and story. Emma became a reference in this process, teaching adapted basketball classes and encouraging young people to discover their potentials. Schools in the region began implementing more robust inclusion projects. Lectures on respect, diversity, and overcoming adversity became part of the curriculum, using Emma's narrative as a living example of resilience. Students learned that disability does not mean impossibility, but simply a different way of perceiving and experiencing the world. Local business owners, touched by the community transformation, created professional training programs aimed at people with disabilities. Job opportunities were opened, breaking old paradigms of exclusion. Emma actively participated in these initiatives, guiding and supporting the integration of these new professionals into the job market. Her dream of participating in the basketball championship, once distant, took on new dimensions. Intensive training, local sponsorships, and the community's unanimous support prepared her for regional and even state competitions. Every shot, every movement in her wheelchair represented more than a sports performance. It was a declaration of power and hope. Her relationship with Max, even after his return, remained special. John and Mary frequently visited Emma, maintaining a bond of affection that transcended the possession of the animal. The dog had been the catalyst for a much larger transformation, a living symbol of how unexpected connections can reshape destinies. Silver Pines was no longer the same town. The harsh winter that once seemed oppressive now represented just a season, while the human warmth conquered by Emma warmed every corner, every heart. Her journey proved that true revolution stems from Simple gestures, unconditional love, and the courage to see beyond appearances. The young wheelchair-bound girl had become much more than an athlete or activist, a beacon of hope, illuminating paths for all those who once believed their dreams were impossible. Emma understood that her story could not end with moments of individual overcoming. It was necessary to expand horizons, to create bridges of transformation that connected her personal experience with the realities of others with disabilities. The young girl realized that every obstacle overcome did not represent just a personal victory, but an opportunity to inspire and mobilize an entire community. Her call went beyond the wheelchair, transcending physical limits and reaching deeper dimensions of human connection. Her message was clear and powerful. True inclusion is not limited to architectural adaptations or formal policies, but arises from the ability to understand, respect, and value differences. Every person, regardless of their limitations, carries unique potentials that deserve to be celebrated and developed. The encounter with Max had triggered a transformation that went beyond her personal story. The dog had not only rescued her from the cold that fateful night, but had planted a seed of hope that would germinate into a silent revolution of consciousness. Through her own journey, Emma invited everyone to reflect on their concepts of overcoming. It was not about romanticizing difficulties, but recognizing that every challenge carries within it an opportunity for growth and redefinition. Her narrative became an urgent call to look beyond appearances, to deconstruct prejudices, to embrace diversity as a fundamental value. Every gesture, every initiative, every smile represented a concrete step toward a more empathetic and inclusive society. Emma's legacy surpassed any geographical or temporal limits. Her story whispered to the world that true strength does not lie in physical perfection, but in the ability to transform pain into purpose, limitations into possibilities. A silent invitation echoed through her journey. What if everyone could see in the different not an obstacle, but an opportunity for growth? What if we could celebrate diversity as the most beautiful expression of human existence? Emma knew that her mission was just beginning, and each new day would be a blank page, ready to be filled with colors of hope, resilience, and unconditional love.